Chair's report. I will be a bit longer tonight than usual. I'm going to give a basic chairman's report to start out, and then I'm going to move into the initial discussion item. Just to be clear, some of you might have a original agenda before the revision, and we've moved the report from council down to part of the discussion. So certainly we're at that time of year for NMC with graduation approaching. It's very busy. Just a bit more than a week ago, we had our annual retirement recognition ceremony, and very pleased that every member of our Board of Trustees was able to attend. Several of us were also able to attend a barbecue with the Maritime Academy last week on the state of Michigan, and that was, again, another opportunity to observe the professionalism, enthusiasm, and dedication of our Maritime Academy faculty, staff, and students, cadets. As I said, we're currently preparing for graduation. It's just a bit less than 2 weeks away, and that'll be another chance that we'll have to recognize staff, faculty, and students. Also, we are in our annual process for approval of the budget for the coming fiscal year, and as I trust everyone can understand, in these times of annually diminishing resources, that becomes an ever greater challenge, and one that takes a great deal of attention. So at this point, I'd like to segue into the discussion items, and those are initially the letter allegations and report of council. In saying that, I'm really pleased to observe, and I trust those of you that are here also may have, that this is our first audio and video recorded regular board meeting, which is taking place as a result of the direction of the board by unanimous resolution in our January board meeting to direct the policy committee and administration to develop a policy for approval. And so that everyone understands, policy is what NMC's board does. We direct policy and do not become involved in matters of day-to-day administration. Because the idea and decision to record meetings was a policy change, it was required to follow our normal procedures. When the board directs it, it goes back to staff and policy committee for the formulation of a written policy. Our procedure then requires a first reading at a subsequent board meeting and a final reading and approval of the policy at the next monthly board meeting. This procedure allows us to receive and review, among other things, public comment or suggestions, corrections, revisions that the board might deem appropriate with regard to the proposed policy. That's the process that we followed here. What took place in February and then in March were the required first and second readings and final approval of the actual policy. It's important to note, I think, as well, that given the recent publicity and editorial comment, that the board directed formulation of this policy immediately after we began to see comment from members of the public who were not affiliated with the local newspaper, who at that point had been practically the only voice requesting it. So please know and understand, we take into significant account what the public has to say, and we care about it. Sunday's editorial suggests that NMC had a contempt for public opinion. I can assure you that nothing, absolutely nothing, could be farther from the truth in that statement. But let me also suggest, and I do this very seriously, we do not consider every position a newspaper takes to be actual public opinion or in the best interest of the public. Until shortly before our January board meeting, there had been no significant expressed desire from the public to video record or archive our board meetings. Our policy committee did not recommend recording initially because there had been no indication at the time the policy committee met from anyone except the local newspaper that it was a significant issue. I would like to clear up one thing too, and state that on January 21, when the policy committee met, although I had suggested that the policy committee members convene before the scheduled time, that did not take place. Excuse me, I just want to gather my thoughts here for a second. I did say on the record at the policy committee meeting as well, my reasons for not going forward and recommending an adoption of the policy, and that was that we did not receive any requests from the public in general. Now, after that time, I was reminded that we had received an email from one gentleman that belonged to another public body suggesting that it would be a good idea to audio record our meetings, and I took the suggestion in context of saying not that it was his desire, but he thought that it would be good public relations, and recommended on that basis, but it was not a request to televise. The statement I made at the policy committee meeting was correct. After the policy committee recommendation was published in our local newspaper, I received several emails and a call from a constituent indicating that they thought that the video recording of our meetings was a good idea. There was also an unscientific poll conducted in the local newspaper that indicated a large number of people, at least as I recall several hundred, opined that we should probably do so as well. Certainly, there was probably more discussion and more information sharing by way of email or otherwise at this point in time because of that short time frame and the difference in that public opinion that we received. In a personal email to another board member, not intended to be a public record, I expressed my thought that our local newspaper, even if the board made this decision, might not still be satisfied and might attack the process if not the substance of the decision, which somewhat ironically was what the newspaper had been asking for. That email was private. It wasn't required to be supplied. I supplied it voluntarily after insistence by the newspaper that we provide other emails. But let me say strongly at this point, and I ask you to hold me to it. I'm ever mindful of the fact that the public position, particularly as chair of the Board of Trustees, when I speak publicly, it reflects on NMC. Thus, I chose language in expressing my opinions in a private email, which I would never have purposely chosen in representing the college in a public forum. That said, I certainly would not have changed my sentiment, which I stand by 100%, but I would have presented it in a much more diplomatic fashion. Certainly, my spouse would have insisted on that if it didn't feel it was already my obligation. But I want to say again, this was a private email between two individuals, and it was an expression of my intent. It was not subject to required disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act or otherwise. And when it was disclosed and made public, the newspaper was the one that chose to make it public, and then apparently as a point to point out that I'd used an appropriate language. So, as Paul Harvey might say, there's the rest of the story. When we continued to receive requests and follow-up requests from the local newspaper, I provided several other emails, including this one, which were personal and not meet the requirement for public disclosure. Again, it's a local paper that chose to make those emails public, not me, not NMC. The newspaper also chose to quote emails of board members, including some private ones, which were provided voluntarily, and which I believe would not have been legally compelled in any circumstance. In one letter from our president, Tim Nelson, but did not provide a full copy of the letter which they sent to President Nelson and to me, nor did they print President Nelson's immediate response. The letter from the local newspaper that I speak of was signed personally by Neil Ronquist, the publisher, and Mike Tyree, the executive editor. And I have it with me tonight, and I am entering it into the official record of this meeting, and I ask that it be published with the minutes on our website so that all may see it in its entirety. Likewise, I have President Nelson's response, which I likewise presented and asked it become a part of the record and placed on the website. The letter from the paper basically recites most of which it believes favorable to its position, and most of which has been published in the newspaper. However, the newspaper has not chosen to share the letter thus far, and I think it needs to be made public. Their letter contained, I'm not going to read it, but the whole thing, but their letter contained an express threat. It said, quote, "The Record Eagle may file a criminal complaint with the Grand Traverse County prosecutor." It also suggested civil action as an option, and then it went on to state, in the alternative to the threatened criminal action, the local paper, quote, and I'm going to read this, offers the following opportunity to NMC's elected officials and administrators. One, NMC's elected officials would acknowledge during a public meeting their violations of the Open Meetings Act, abbreviated OMA, an acknowledgement which would meet with Record Eagle approval prior to its publication. Number two, NMC's elected officials and administration would draft and approve a policy which requires their adherence to OMA and FOIA laws, and do so with specificity that would include but not be limited to policy language that expressly prohibits elected officials, email, telephone, or other non-public meeting deliberations or discussion on public business. And three, NMC's administrators and all elected NMC officials must agree to receive training from a recognized expert on state FOIA and OMA laws as to NMC's officials' legal responsibilities and obligations under those laws. This training must occur within a reasonable time and either occur in a public meeting or be documented in meetings of a closed session if the training occurs in such a setting. Finally, the letter stated, quote, "Separate from the above-mentioned alternative to civil or criminal action, the Record Eagle also demands immediate resignation of NMC Board Chair Doug Bishop from that post." It then concludes, "We look forward to your response no later than April 2, 2014. The letter I'm talking about was dated on the 26th of March, but was not received in the President's office until Friday the 28th. I believe the second was the following Tuesday. President Nelson's letter, available for anyone to read, was cordial and stated as follows. Quote, "Coordinating a full meeting of the trustees seems improbable within the next 2 weeks. Currently, 4 of our trustees are out of town. However, it is my intention to have this matter reviewed at the next meeting of the NMC Board of Trustees. Referral to legal counsel under circumstances such as these is consistent with practice and past actions during my administration at Northwestern Michigan College. To my knowledge, no official communication from the local newspaper has been received subsequent to that letter. I would leave for members of the public and anyone here to individually review that letter and in light of what they believe the role of the newspaper in their community to be. Before continuing, however, I'd like to reiterate President Nelson's statement that it is NMC's practice when any allegation of violation of law is received is referred for investigation of counsel. That's been done, and our counsel is here this evening to make a brief report in public. In any event, I've been confident personally since receipt of the letter that no one on our Board of Trustees has ever had any intent to violate the law. And further, that despite what anyone else may opine or print, there has been no violation of the law. We've referred it to council, and council confirms in their opinion that no violation of the law on behalf of NMC or any of its individual trustees has occurred. I do want to make it clear there was no meeting of the policy committee or the members of the policy committee prior to the January 21 scheduled meeting. Likewise, it was not my intent, nor did the board as a quorum in any medium deliberate in violation of the Open Meetings Act prior to a decision on January 25. Although I'm not intending to further review the facts of what I consider to be a classic non-issue, I'm certainly willing to share the rationalization of why I changed my opinion between the policy committee meeting and the board meetings. In fact, I would suggest to you that I've already done so by what I said and was recorded by the newspaper at both meetings, and I say that pretty well sums it up. Both President Nelson and I have stated publicly and to the local newspaper we regard any violation or charge of violation of statute as serious. I do not make decisions for the board, which is the reason that we had to wait until today to respond to the accusations. Other board members may weigh in when I'm finishing my report and after we've heard from council, but it's my position that, and recommendation, while no response is required, as to the first condition, I will not acknowledge violation of the law because I have not violated the law, and I don't believe any other member of the Board of Trustees has either. Further, and I want to be absolutely clear on this, as an elected official representing Northwestern Michigan College, I would never agree to make any public statement on behalf of the college that was conditioned upon pre-approval by our local newspaper. With regard to their second condition, every one of us as trustees of NMC are sworn and expected to abide by the law. Many of us have made the same pledge in our own professions. I am not going to further subject us to something that we are already bound to. And finally, with regard to the demand for more training, on a more pleasant note, well, I believe that members of the Board of Trustees adequately understood and still understand the provisions and implications of both the Open Meetings Act and the Freedom of Information Act. Since this has been raised as an issue, I don't intend to disregard it, and I am going to recommend it to my fellow trustees that we do institute a periodic refresher session with regard to these significant laws. And further, since NMC is first and foremost an educational institution, I'm also going to suggest that we look into the possibility of offering this periodic refresher training to any other public body that might wish to avail themselves of it. We could even provide it on the internet. I certainly have no problem acknowledging or suggesting what I see as an appropriate procedure, whether it was initially my idea or not. With regard to the demand that I resign, that's to me personally, doesn't involve the other trustees, and I'm not going to dignify it with a response. Finally, I've already had discussions with our attorneys concerning the idea of discussing and perhaps through the policy committee putting together a comprehensive email and communication policy to guide board staff, which would decide in advance the issues of private and public emails and minimize the possibility of any future misunderstandings. Before I turn this over to our attorney, Chuck Judson, I have to say, in my nearly 8 years, which is not a significant period of time compared to several others at this table, as a board member of NMC, I have been continually impressed with the dedication of my fellow board members, our president, our vice president, our staff, and our faculty. Their dedication to the public and the desire to solicit, listen to, and whenever possible to act upon what the public wishes and needs. Any suggestion that NMC does not care about the public or what the public thinks or has to say is completely wrong and absolute fabrication without support. And I would further state that it is not a given that what a local newspaper or editor may say or think is in fact the voice of the public. That said, it's been nearly 3 months since we unanimously acted to create the policy to address a desire expressed from the actual public that we make a visual and audio record of our meetings, and which will be available for the public to review. Anyone who's objectively followed NMC since the time that I've been on the board, and frankly for a long time before that, in my own experience, has seen that the idea of not being transparent is not a valid issue. The minutes of our proceedings have always been posted on our website, as have our board packets and agenda. We provide our newspaper with the agenda and board packet in advance, as well as notice of all our committee meetings. The long and short of it, at this point, is we have adopted a policy very quickly after a number of our constituents who had not previously spoken addressed the desire and the need for it. The decision to create the policy was made in January. It was approved through our normal course of policy approval in February and March, and it's in effect today. This policy will be subject to our continual review of policies in terms of what we may wish to do with it in the future. I personally consider the debate on the policy over, and we have yet to have any significant complaints about it after we adopted. The only issue has been, as I said, the attack on the process when the substance is agreeable. As I said, the policy is like all of our other policies. It will be reviewed periodically, and it may be reviewed more often than not if there are suggestions or reasons that it might be changed in the future. There's a lot of work to be done at NMC, a lot of work, but NMC is in good shape. Its Board of Trustees and its administration in the immediate future need to concentrate on that. I do not personally intend to detract from those matters by comment on this issue after this evening. I would like to say finally, I've been blessed with many things in my life. And I thank the Lord for those blessings, and not the least of them has been the opportunity to serve this college and serve on this board. And I intend to keep doing so for as long as I can. At this time, I would like to recognize our attorney, Chuck Judson, to give his report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, the members of the board. I'm at the, hopefully the very tail end of an upper respiratory kind of a bronchitis. I'm not contagious, although it's probably best that you're that far away. I can tell the assembled group of people I'm not contagious, but forgive me for parts of my voice. What I'd like to do is provide a little bit of background. Not that this issue is unfamiliar to all of you, but to try and provide some perspective for some decisions that you're going to have to make relative to how much of my report you want to discuss tonight. In late January and early February, a local newspaper filed Freedom of Information requests with NMC, seeking to review communications within the college email system and NMC files, which occurred between board members related to the videotaping of board meetings. The paper also sought emails of individual trustees from private email addresses which were not otherwise contained within the NMC system. The Michigan Freedom of Information Act permits access by the public to public records of NMC. By law, a public record is defined, and I'll quote, "A writing prepared, owned, used, in the possession of, or retained by a public body in the performance of an official function." In our opinion, Michigan law remains unclear in addressing the extent of the application of the Freedom of Information Act to private emails of public officials which were not otherwise placed on file with NMC. We provided written direction to you, the board, and you then voluntarily provided emails to the college related to the videotaping. Those emails were then provided to the Record Eagle in response to its Freedom of Information Act request. We note that The Record Eagle published an editorial on February 2nd, 2014, alleging violations of the Michigan Open Meetings Act, even though the emails that were provided had not yet been received by them. As indicated by the chair, on March 26th, the letter was received from the Record Eagle alleging violations of the Open Meetings Act, and President Nelson asked my firm to review and report on this to the board, which we've done in several written opinions, which were provided to you recently. Now, that's really the basis of our discussion. As you note from the opinions, a part was provided in a separate communication, which, based upon some discussion with the president and the chair, offers you the possibility that you may act to, in a very limited way, waive any privilege that you might have as an attorney-client privilege to a memo that we've identified specifically as one, report regarding communication protocols. And so I will be looking for affirmative action on your part at this meeting if you do want to waive that, which will have an impact on the balance of the report that I will make tonight.
It is my recommendation that with regard to that report, that we waive privilege on it, and if anyone else feels the same, I would like a motion to that effect.
So moved.
A second.
Support it.
Okay, good. It's been moved and seconded that we, this is just for identification check, what's the title of this?
The memo was a report regarding communication protocols.
Is there any discussion?
It is specifically distinct from a document that was provided to you that was labeled directly attorney-client privilege, involving an opinion and analysis of some of the legal issues related to this. This report separated for a more general statement. We believe that it was still provided to you under the attorney-client privilege and indicated that in a separate cover letter, but it does contain information that has been discussed in a general extent and could very well be waived for purposes of discussion.
It's been moved and seconded that we waive privilege as to that particular memorandum. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. With four, that was unanimous, correct?
Hearing none, motion passes. Go ahead.
I will be brief, because I believe your report covered a variety of the issues that are part of how this report came about. In our report, we limited our review to the same emails that were produced and sent to the Record Eagle. Our review of these emails acknowledges the statements which have been recently reported, but we do not believe that the conduct constitutes a violation of the Open Meetings Act, and there are two main reasons. First, NMC's policy committee has been charged as an advisory committee to the board, and its recommendations come back to the board for action and implementation. And second, Michigan law has recognized that an individual board member who informally canvasses other board members to find out where votes may be on a particular issue is not in violation of the Open Meetings Act. We think the email communications support the conclusions and interpretations of Michigan law that we've reported. Record Eagle reporting over this past weekend suggests that this is not an issue between the Record Eagle and NMC. Perhaps, and I'll leave that to others to judge. But as a lawyer for NMC, we're prepared to debate the concerns in proper forum, but we acknowledge that a spirited defense of past actions does not always address the heart of this particular issue, which is whether a more deliberate form of communication and conduct could occur going forward to remove any perception that the NMC board does not deliberate or make its decisions in public. Based on the privilege that's been retained, we're not going to defend our position publicly beyond what the board is prepared to discuss tonight, since the potential allegations have not yet been fully resolved. But as indicated by the chair, we note that there are two actions that were referenced by the newspaper, which we think warrant further discussion. The first one, well, passing by the first one based upon the privilege. The first one for discussion is that NMC's elected officials and administration should draft and approve a policy that requires adherence to the Open Meetings Act and the Freedom of Information Act with language that assures the public that deliberation and decision-making occurs in public meetings. That was one of the demands that was incorporated from the newspaper. We agree. In fact, we're recommending that NMC refer this matter to its policy committee, similar to the action suggested by your chair. We are prepared to assist with preparation of a policy to address email communication and public record retention, which would enhance public confidence that NMC conducts its business in public. This could be completed for review as early as the next board meeting, if so chosen. The other reference from the Record Eagle requested NMC's administrators and all NMC elected officials agree to receive training from a recognized expert on state FOIA and OMA laws, Freedom of Information Act and the Open Meetings Act. Similar to the comments that received from the chair, we think that this should be expanded to include issues that relate to email communication and record retention. And we see this as being a proper forum, that being Northwestern Michigan College, for an invitation to a number of public boards. You have a jurisdiction that is broader in some geographic scope than others, and you're an educational institution. And we're recommending consideration that NMC adopt an annual seminar for public bodies in the region to meet and discuss the importance of public access and to provide guidance from experts for development of policies to meet current requirements under state law. The first program could be scheduled within the next few months, in my opinion. The perception that deliberation and decision-making does not occur in public meetings deters a public board from its mission. Email communication between board members on private email addresses is not per se an improper communication, and under the circumstances, we don't believe it violated the Open Meetings Act. However, we do acknowledge that it can have the appearance of conducting public business behind closed doors, and it does not offer the opportunity to maintain that communication as a public record within our system. As a consequence, we encourage you to consider the establishment of a new policy at NMC to address communications, and we also see NMC as a proper institution to coordinate an annual seminar for public bodies and sponsor state experts to discuss the responsibilities of the public board consistent with Michigan law. Now, as many of you, you've had the opportunity to review other things. That's really the conclusion of my report for purposes of the meeting, but I would be very happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions?
Not a question, but a comment. On the annual meeting and training on that, I know that Bob Cooney, the prosecuting attorney, is well respected and has given many training programs on that. And I think the other option is for us to contact MMRMA, which does have an arm that does specific training on FOIA and the Open Meetings Act. And just for this board's information, I was requested to do a training program by the city in the state of Michigan on those two subjects. I was to be the presenter. So I will equally take the training, although I've been through it many times.
I have a comment as well. First of all, thank you for sharing that with us. I'm not an attorney, and the law sometimes to me doesn't make intuitive sense in all cases. And in this particular case, there seems to be a lot of areas pertaining to open meetings and communications that are gray areas. There seems to be undecided law in the state of Michigan with respect to these issues. And so I do support the policy committee going after developing more comprehensive policies for us, so we don't go into those gray areas. And I do think that's relatively low-hanging fruit for us to pursue as well.
If the chair would allow, I received a communication just before tonight's meeting from an individual in the county who did not want to stay, did not give me the name, but I would like to meet him. It says, "Dear board members, first of all, I want to thank you for serving the public on this board. Your job requires contributing many hours of your time and service to our community and making decisions that are not popular in all circles. The reason for this letter is to support your continuing efforts to help improve a college that has meant so much to the region. Please remember that the Record Eagle is one voice, a corporate voice that operates a large media business in Alabama, Community Newspaper Holdings, Inc. For the past year, the publisher and reporter have worked to profit from the sale of newspapers and advertising in our community. Their profit motivations require making allegations which generate controversy. They want control of the community discourse. These are the tactics being used around the country where they do business. The word, quote, respect, end quote, for Northern Michigan does not fit with their profit motive. The tactics of allegation that are being used in recent articles and opinion pages destroy community image. They do not lead to problem resolution. They would suggest that our leaders, the very representative of the people in our community, are careless and clueless when serving our interests. They may as well be calling the residents of our community careless and clueless. Your board and the people of this community are not perfect. We do believe in volunteering and serving. Please do not cave into tactics that create so much negativism. The negativity can be infectious, and if they get away with this here, who is next? It should be no wonder that decent people are reluctant to run for office when these corporations are simply looking to profit from the demise of good people by controlling public discourse. As a very concerned resident, thank you for serving. And I'd like to go into the minutes. I'll give that to Holly too.
The other thing, Chuck, I just want to make clear, I understand the comments in terms of policy and the idea that policy should provide guidance and reflect compliance with all existing statutes, certainly not just the two we mentioned. My objection is to what I can under no other terms than says pretentious suggestion that we have a policy that says that the trustees will follow the law. That's clearly not required, and we're clearly bound to follow the law in any event. So I just wanted to make that clarification in terms of what you were suggesting as a policy involved in place. We're not talking about a policy telling us to do something that we already do.
Well, I appreciate that comment. I think it actually provides context. As we know, if you have a contradictory position regarding this matter, it doesn't necessarily resolve it. On the other hand, if we take a look at what can be done going forward, it can provide some assurances to any perception that might otherwise be taken from the communications that have been published, that the board does its deliberations and will continue to in a public way is beneficial. The other issue that we saw here has to do with the way that we can maintain our records, and I think that's a part of what we'd like to address in terms of the definition of a record and how we maintain it.
Yes, sure.
I think one of the challenges is that we all do a lot of work before we come to this meeting. I don't think there's maybe an understanding of that. And so when we come to a meeting, we may be presented with issues, and we may choose not to discuss those issues because we have already had it at a study session, we've already had it at a retreat, we've already had it at a prior board meeting, and when we finally have it in front of us, we make a decision. And so if you just happen to pop in at that moment in time, you're going to go, gee whiz, why didn't they duke it out on this? Or why wasn't there any dissent? Been there, done that, okay? I don't think it's our responsibility to, at every meeting, build a record to show people that we're doing our job. I think we're doing our job, as Tim has told us, as president, the product shows you that we're doing our job. And this institution is moving forward, it's doing great things. We are doing our best to help it do that as well. And if people aren't hearing enough conversation, they may not have been here at the time that we had that conversation. So I just want to make sure that even though we are a policy governance board, we are not going to be driven by policy to perform for a camera or a tape recording or a record, because we're already performing, we're already doing our job. So
Thanks, Jill. That's well put. And The other thing I would like to say, I mentioned that I would, I think I mentioned it during my report, that I would indicate it on the record. Clearly, my opinion, I just want to get it out there, but anyone that took the time to review both the recording of the board meeting and the recorded policy committee would know that this was stated. That is, my reluctance to approve a policy or a recommendation for a policy at the policy committee meeting was based on an absolute dearth of expressed need for the policy from the public. And the minutes of that policy committee meeting also reflected a firm statement by Chairperson Gore Follett that said, if we start to get input from the committee, we will reconsider this.
From the community.
From the community, I misspoke. If we start to get input from the public, this is always open to reconsideration. I made mention of that at the board meeting, and also stated that I received emails and I received one call from a very nice constituent who couldn't understand, based upon reading the articles, why we were refusing to provide our minutes to the paper. But that was enough for me. I mean, I'm not. There were other questions that I had about the policy early on, and there wasn't a demand for it, whether we needed it, but it was a no-brainer at that point. And frankly, it's mystifying to me that we can state that we'll reconsider if we receive public input, that we receive public input and state it, that we received it, and then vote to approve a policy, that's somehow objectionable and something that needs to be looked into. It reminds me of the Wendy's commercial, "Where's the beef?" What is the objection here? No one's asking us to overturn the decision. And there's been no violation, I'm going to reiterate, there's been no violation of the law. But that said, I am fully committed to moving forward with looking at a policy that makes it absolutely clear that we cure any misunderstandings in the future. Go ahead.
I'd like to speak a little bit to just the recording policy itself, because certainly the discussion had a life of its own over the course of several months. The objections that I heard to the policy, various discussions, were wide-ranging. They started with, well, you guys won't be as open speaking in public if you're being recorded, and I think we're proving tonight that that's not the case, and that was quickly taken off the table as a concern. Another concern was how much would it cost, and we found out what it was cost, and it was not that significant. It was an investment. We also asked the question, well, are there other community colleges that are doing it? And I think there's 2 out of 28 at this time, if I'm not mistaken. But the last issue that we came to that was a barrier for many trustees was, did the public want it? And that was the tipping point. And I've explained that to a variety of people in the community that were interested in the topic. That was the tipping point for this issue, is did the public want it? When the decision of the policy committee, or their recommendation, was publicized in the paper on January 20th, I believe it was, we started to get feedback from the public. Was it a wave of people contacting us? No, it wasn't a wave. I don't even think it was a dozen, but it was more than sufficient because we already had a tipping point. And so I think it's important to understand that the issues were weighed. We talked about objections. We talked about them openly. And the last issue that was there, that the public wanted, clearly there's an interest, and so we're doing it, which is what we see happening this evening.
Anyone else? Thanks, Jeff.